Hi, and welcome everyone. We're just going to wait a few more minutes for people to join. Thanks for joining. I just want to make sure there is it's a standard send out a link with the example sheet, Excel sheet. Just want to I'm going to paste it in this chat. I'll paste it again a bit later for others who join. Just going to find it and paste it in. Stan, you still have that link?
Yes.
Okay.
Want me to paste it?
Yeah, if you can paste it in the chat would be good. I got it as well, but yeah.
Are you going to do it?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, good.
Got it.
Yeah, I think we'll have to start a few minutes late because they're still coming in.
Yeah. Now it's still 2 minutes to 1, so I'm sure everyone's going to show up hopefully at 1.
Yeah, I've just shared my screen. Presume, can you see it?
Yes, that's looking good. Yeah, this is what you will be downloading from that link. I'll keep pasting it every now and then.
Okay. Is that full size now?
You should be able to make it your full screen. I don't know what you're seeing at the moment.
Yeah, I think I need to. Well, I'll minimize the sidebar as soon as we start. So we'll give it a few minutes after 1 just to make sure that everybody's joined. Yeah, now I see it perfectly. If those of you who've joined haven't seen the download in the chat, just or you haven't received it by email, please go to the chat and download it. You still have 2 or 3 minutes to go and make yourselves a cup of coffee, although I think you should keep everything clear so that you can concentrate on the job at hand, because it's going to be quite a intense hour.
Those who joined, can you just confirm that if you see or you have the note, the presentation slide, which is available in the chat if you haven't downloaded from the email? Yeah. Grant, I see you put your hand up. Is it something you want to mention, or are you just saying hi? I got someone message me saying the chat is disabled. Let me have a look.
Not on my side.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see. These can chat with everyone. Okay, let me just try now. Okay, I see they changed some Zoom settings. So if let's see now. Let's place the link. Please confirm you received it. Thanks for the message, Sam. Let's see. Okay, now just to let you know, I have the file. Thank you, Grant. I will send the link again. Remember to notice that setting and see if anyone else has that problem in the future. All right. We've only got half the people in, but I think it's time we're going to run out of time if we wait any longer. So, Stan, if you want to just do your introductions.
Okay, so sure. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining. Those of you who have joined. Thank you, Adrian, for joining us. Adrian, of course, is the go-to guy for Excel in the world. Knows more about Excel than even Microsoft. And personally, I'm looking forward to this hour. I have been looking forward to this hour with relish. So you need no more introduction, Adrian. The floor is yours.
Great stuff. Thank you so
By
much.
the way, he tells me that he lives and breathes and eats and sleeps Excel. His life is a spreadsheet.
Don't embarrass me. It's the truth, but it's embarrassing. Okay, great. Welcome everyone. I think we've got about 15 people on board. So obviously a very short hour. So I just want to explain to you what I've given you here. Based on the skills assessments that we received, it's quite a mixed group. So we're pretty much going to take it kind of from the start. The idea is even people who've worked with pivots, there's a whole bunch of things you'll learn along the way, but it's just to make sure that you understand the power of pivot tables. And pivot tables are probably the #1 tool in Excel. Once you understand them, you'll never stop using them. I'm just going to stop my video and just go into what we can see here. So when you get the file, it'll look like this. Now, keep in mind, I don't expect you there to try and take notes because it's just too short a time. So what we've provided is this is what we're going to cover, not every lesson, but you'll see that every lesson has got a matching YouTube video. So everything I'm going to cover now and a bit more is available in the YouTube video. So don't sit there and try and keep up and he clicked here, then he clicked here. All these things are covered in the YouTube videos. Obviously, if you can, subscribe to our channel. But basically, I'd like you to rather focus on this. You are welcome to ask questions as we go along. I may not notice it, but hopefully someone will just tell me the questions come up. So let's get going. Basically, how this file will work when you're looking at it is we can jump to the various places, and there's the YouTube channel. So I'm just going to go to the start. So basically, what are pivot tables? Very simple. Pivot tables allow you to take something like this, which you'll see is, in this case, only hundreds of rows of data, but normally this could be thousands of rows of data, and easily convert them into a report you can work with. What we're going to focus on here is the various things that a pivot table can do, what to watch out for, because what we've found in our training courses is that pivot tables can look a bit daunting. If you do something slightly wrong, it looks like a mess. Actually, it's not a mess. One click would fix it, but then people give up and they go back to manually calculating stuff. Was there a question?
Sorry, Adrian, I don't know what you said. You cut out for a second there. So I'll just repeat that sentence.
Okay, sorry. So basically, I don't know which sentence. The last one.
You were saying something about it's 1,000, like 1,000. Only this was
Perfect. Okay. So basically, the way pivot tables works, this is only 1,000 rows of data, but you can see it still will be hard to summarize this. What does this mean? Too much data. Even if it's 10,000, 100,000 rows, pivot tables allow for it. So I'm just going to show you how we set it up, point out a few things, and then go through the real power of a pivot table. So the first thing is how to set it up. Now, a lot of people who do pivot tables, they'll kind of click in this area and they go straight to the pivot table. Please be very careful. With anything in Excel, don't let it guess. If I click here and I say, put the pivot table in, Excel guesses and it says, I think I'll put in these 100 rows. Please don't do that. If there are blank rows, it kind of gets confused. So whenever you set up a pivot table, the first thing you do is you highlight it, you go to insert, and you say a pivot table. You'll see it asks you a few questions. I don't want to focus too much on this. It's more the pivot table side of it. Where you want to put it, you can link from a database, you can link from an external source, etc. I'm just going to say new worksheet. And when I say okay, you'll see this pops up. Now, this is the thing that often confuses people. They don't understand what they're looking at, and they don't understand how this relates to that. So what we're going to do is first create a quick pivot table, point a few things out to you, things that bug people a lot, and then we're going to go into a little bit more detail on the various things. So as you can see, when we click that insert, there's a little section here called pivot table. On the right-hand side, there's a field list, and these names here, you'll see correspond to our headings here. So whatever you put up here is listed here. You'll see you've got something called filters, columns, rows, and values. We're going to cover that just now. And at the top here, you've got something called pivot table analyze and design. Now, the first thing with a pivot table to realize, because a lot of people do this, they click somewhere else and then they think they've broken it. So that disappears, this disappears, etc. So it's just whenever that happens, all you need to do is click back on the pivot table and you'll see everything comes back. Occasionally, because it gets in the way, you may close it like that. Again, it's very simple. Click anywhere in the pivot table. Under pivot table analyze, there's something called field list, and it just switches it on. So it's just useful to know how it's working. I'm going to create a quick pivot table just to show you how easy it is. Now, this data I've given you is a phone bill. So it's a phone bill from a while ago. Who was called, what time, was it a call or SMS, weekday, weekend, and the costs. Now, as you can see, 935 rows covers, I think, about 3 months. The issue is if you had to do this manually, so tell me how much was spent in February. Now, you need to work through all of this. So the power of pivot tables is this is how easy it is to do this in a pivot table. So you'll see if you look here, one of the columns we have is called month. So all we're going to do is pull this month into the rows. Now, anyone who does already do pivot tables, it's very tempting to click this tick box. And it works. The problem is it's very similar to what I said in the beginning. When you tick it, Excel does a bit of a guess. It thinks, oh, I think he wants to put it in rows. So my suggestion is don't let Excel guess. It gets very confusing if Excel guesses wrong. So what I do is I normally go a little bit to the right. You click and hold, and I'm going to drag it down into this thing called rows. And when I let go, can you see here, my report is starting to form. So the reason it's saying January, February, March is because the pivot table has gone into the phone bill to the month. Here's the month, and it's found all the unique items in there. And you can see when you do your drop down, it consists of January, February, March. So without you doing anything, it's now gone and said, I can see in the month, there's something called January, something called February, something called March. A little bit boring. But now what I can do, can you see there's something called bill? If I go back to my data, here's the bill, it's all the individual costs. It happens to add up to 2,237. All I do, same thing, don't tick it. Go to the right, click, hold, and drag down to values. When I let go, can you see instantly it's given me some numbers? Now, what it has done, so normally you would have to go work out where the January is, add it up, type it in. It has gone and done all of that for you. It has gone and said, the things that are called January add up to 184. So it's the equivalent of you going here and saying, give me all the Januaries, and then adding up what that total is. You'll see 184. But as you saw, it did it instantly. So there's your first pivot. Now, this one is quite basic, and I suppose you could take 5 minutes and do it. But you can see the true power of the pivot table. Now, this could be 3 months, could be 12 months, it could be 4 years, it doesn't matter. All we did was we clicked and dragged, clicked and dragged. Now, before we get into the more detail of all the things you can do here, I just want to cover a couple of things about pivot tables. So the first thing here is pivot tables are a little bit different to normal Excel. So normal Excel is I click in a cell and I type equals and I do a calculation. Even though this pivot table looks like it's part of these cells, it's actually hovering above these cells. It's a separate tool. So just to show you what I mean by that, if I do this, so let's say I decide I actually don't like January, February, March on top of each other. I want to insert a blank between it. You'll notice if I right click and I say insert, it says we can't do it because pivot tables are their own little tool. They have to stay together. And a lot of the things we need to do, we have to do it through the pivot table tool. So for example, I've purposely left this formatting a little bit messy. So one of the first tools you need to realize is if you want to format this to be, let's say, 2 decimals, you can go the traditional way. I click on that cell, I right click, and I go format cells. But because this is not in these cells, it's hovering above the cells, that one will work. But when you refresh the pivot table, the formatting gets lost. So you need to realize that a lot of pivot table tools exist that you need to use. Now, to access them, when I'm in the pivot table, you'll see we've got all these tools here. We're going to cover some of them a little bit later. We've got a whole bunch of design tools. But the way I'm going to teach you is more to do with right click. So when I decide that 184, I don't like the way this is formatted, I can click on just one of them. I'm going to right click, and you'll see there's something here called the value field settings. Now, we are going to cover this in a lot more detail very shortly, but I just want to show you, if I click on that, this pops up, and you'll see here there's something called number format. Now, even though when I click on it, it looks exactly like your normal format, because of the way I've done it via pivot table, I can format it. So let's go do that. But before I click OK, notice I only clicked on one cell. And this is just to show you that what I'm going to do here is applied to the pivot table, which means that even though I've clicked on one, Excel knows that these belong together, and however you want to format that one, the rest will be formatted. When I say OK, so watch what happens as I say OK. So you can see, because we did it the right way, what it automatically does is it says, okay, if that must be formatted like this, the rest must be. If you do it the old way, you'd have to highlight those, format it, and when you add more months, the formatting would go away. So perhaps you've seen it before. You format a pivot, you refresh it, and it goes away. That's why. Okay, so that's your first pivot table, nice and simple. What we're now going to do is cover all the things that can be done here in the values. So just in terms of the way to do this, I'm just going to go back to our navigation page. So if you want to follow along, we've done the phone bill. You'll see this 2.0 phone bill is just the source data again. We don't have to worry about it. I'm going to now go to this one called 2.1. Now remember, everything I'm going to cover here plus more is available in this YouTube clip. So if you click on it, you'll see a YouTube video. It's got the exact same example, probably says the exact same things in the same way as I'm saying them. But let's just go now to values. Also, you'll just notice that on each page, hyperlink to get back to the navigation page, but that same YouTube video clip is here. So if you want to know what we need to do here, a little bit later, you click on this and watch it. Okay, so what are we talking about with regards to the values? With a pivot table, you have the ability to summarize it, rows, columns, but probably the most important is the values. So what the values allows me to do is to take various columns and do stuff with them. So what we've currently shown you was very simple. We dragged it in and all it did was add up everything. Just want to check there's no questions. So all we did was add up everything. But what you need to realize is that this section, there's a lot that you can do with it. So the first thing you can do with it, notice I've just taken sum of bill. But if I want to, I can say, actually, I also want to see what the net profit is. So I'm going to, again, not ticking it, to the right, click on it, hold, and drag down. When I let go, can you see now it says sum of net profit? So what the pivot table has done, it said, well, because you've listed January, February, March, what number must appear here to be the sum of the bill that matches January? And what number must appear here to be sum of net profit? So all that work that you would need to do, filter, copy, paste, sum, write it down, etc., it's done as simply as that. Now, this here is very user-friendly. So let's say we actually want it the other way around, net profit bill. Notice I can just go click and hold on net profit, drag it up and let go. And can you see it's moved around? So everything you see here can be moved around. The other thing, which maybe even people who've worked on pivot tables before may not notice, is can you see here, I'm just going to remove the sum of net profit. When I do it like that, can you see I've just got month, sum of bill. The moment I put another item in, can you see there's another thing here called value? So it's quite useful to know that with a pivot table, you can play around with these things. So the moment something appears there, the reason it's here means it's going to look like this, sum of bill, sum of net profit. If I click on it and I drag it to below the month, can you see the report changes? Now it goes January, sum of bill, sum of net profit. And I can click on the values. If I drag it above the month, it gives me a slightly different look. So that's one of the main powers of pivot tables, is I can change my report and notice not once did I have to check, is my number correct? What's happening here? The data is a single source of the truth. And now we can move it around to get the report that best reflects what we want to do. As I've mentioned, you can pull in as many things as you want. So I could technically go, what's the interconnect costs? What's the charge to MTN? So I can pull all these various items and you can see the numbers coming through. You'll notice that the formatting looks funny. So we need to go do that trick a little bit later to format it. But for now, we're going to just leave it like that. So that's the first thing. The second thing to realize, which some people don't realize, I'm just going to pull net profit out here. So we're left with just the bill and the months, is you actually are able to pull the same column multiple times here. So I can take this bill and pull it again. Bill and pull it again. Now, obviously, this has no meaning at the moment, but you'll see why we do this, why we might take one column of data, in this case, the total bill, and then actually pull more. Now, see, I've got a question from Sam. Can you put more than one heading into rows? That is not just months. Yes, and we will cover that. We're going to go through values first, but then I'm going to show you how you can go and take any one of these and put it over here. But more importantly, also just how to control it. Because when you do that, it can look like a mess, and it's not actually a mess, but actually you just need to be able to control it so it actually means something. So hopefully, if you can just wait, we'll get onto the rows shortly. Sam, you happy with that, eh? Okay, Danny, okay, good. Okay, so why would we ever do this? Well, remember when we went to format the items? So that's the sum of bill. When I right-clicked on this one and I said value field settings, remember this is where we did the format. So I'm just going to make this look a bit prettier. Let's just make it look like that. But what you'll notice is there's a whole bunch of other options here. I'm just going to say that's the formatted version. So, okay. If I come to this one, so this tells me that in January, we spent 184 Rand. But I'd love to know how many calls were involved in that 184 Rand. So all I do is I pull the bill in, I right-click on that number now, I go value field settings, and you'll notice that Excel guessed, so it guessed that you wanted to sum it. It saw numbers and said, I think I'll sum them. But you can actually tell it, no, please count them. Or maybe you should average them. Or maybe give me the maximum number in that list, or the minimum, or the product. And you'll see there's a whole bunch of others. Count the numbers, standard deviation, etc. Well, let's just do a simple one. Instead of summing it, I now want to count it. I want to know if we spent 184 Rand in January, how many events was it? In this case, it's how many phone calls and SMSs happened. When I say count, when I say okay, so notice it's changed its name to count of bill, and it's telling me 58. So with a single column, so that single column there, remember in our data, it's over here, the bill. Out of that single column, we've now got 2 bits of potentially useful information. One is what are the total for each month, and second is how many events led to it. Now, the obvious thing to do is to maybe get an average cost per call. So you could go over here and now try and build a formula that does it. But why do that? When I go to the third one, I right-click. I say value field settings. And you'll see there's an option here called average. So now it's doing exactly that. It's going to the bill and saying, what is the average cost of the January call? So if you want, you can divide that by that, and you'll get this answer. But can you see instantly we've now got quite a bit of information. What did we spend? How many calls? What was the average cost of that call? So it's an extremely, extremely powerful tool. Now I'll just show you one or two of the other items. Right click, value field settings. So for example, if I went to max, when I say okay, that gives me the maximum. So in January, the single biggest cost in January was for a call or SMS, in this case, probably a call, of 22 Rand. In February, it was 36 Rand. In March, it was 31 Rand. So you can see how much information there is. I'm going to go to value field settings. I'm going to go to the minimum. When I say okay, you'll see it shows zeros. Now, the reason it shows zeros is if you happen to look in the phone bill, you'll see that voicemail calls cost 0. So it may look like the wrong answer, but actually that's the truth. There was a call. It's part of these 58, but it costs nothing. So you have that ability to see it. I'm going to right click again, go value field settings, go back to our average. Now, just as a brief interlude, I'm obviously showing you go here, right click, and go to value field settings. But if you look in here, you'll see there's lots of other ways of doing these things. You know, here's that summarize value by sum, count, average. So there's little shortcuts in here. For now, especially if you're learning pivots for the first time, try to do it the proper way, because you can click on it and you'll see it makes a whole bunch more sense. Now, I've shown you this part, which I think is quite nice. You'll notice there's a couple of other things you can do in here. So you'll see here it says custom name. So if you don't like it being called average of bill 3, you can change it to whatever you want. Now that's quite nice, but my advice is don't change this until you've finished the pivot table. Because the moment you change this, it no longer adds the sum of, count of, average of. It just sticks to whatever you've got. And until you finish the pivot table, it's quite nice to, without going through the back end, to be able to see sum of bill, count of bill. You know what it's doing. And then at some point, you can make it say average of costs or whatever the case may be. Okay, so I don't know if there's any questions on that. That's sort of, hopefully most people who've done pivot tables are familiar with that. So I don't know if there's any questions. Danny, have you seen any questions?
No more questions.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so that's kind of, let's say, the very, very basics of pivot tables. But now what people don't realize is how much other power there is. So they come up with other workarounds. So for example, one simple thing, let's say we're looking at this and we don't understand why January is only 58 calls. Now, what we can do is go to the actual date detail and then go and click on January and try and look at it. But there's a very nice, useful thing. If I double click on this 58, so watch what happens down here. When I double click, notice a new sheet is created. And what it does is it shows you, it extracts for you, without you having to do it, all the items from the raw database that make up that 58. So if you'll see, that's 59 rows. So it's the heading plus those 58 bits of data. So what it allows you to do is to quickly look at this and say, oh, let's just see. Oh, it looks like it was only from the 26th of January. Okay, that's why it's only 58 items. Very useful, and you can pretty much double click on any one of them to get more details about any one of these items. Just one thing to realize is that this is purely a report. So let's say you discover that that number is wrong. You cannot change it here. There's no point. It is just a report. It's just been extracted. It does not affect the pivot table. So what we recommend is you open this, maybe use it to cut and paste into an email or something. But generally speaking, either label it as a report, but once you got the information you want, we recommend you delete it. It can't be used. If you want to change something here, you need to go into the data and actually make the change. Now, while we're speaking of that, remember I told you that these pivot tables, they're not in the cells, they're hovering above the cells. Now, why that's also important is pivots act a little bit differently from normal Excel. In normal Excel, if I make a change, so if I come to this data here, I'm just going to make this, let's make it a decent size number, 100. I've changed the data. When I come back to my values, notice nothing's changed. So in normal Excel, what it would do is it would automatically change it. Pivot tables don't work like that. Pivot tables need to be told, something's changed, please refresh yourself. How do you refresh? Very easy. Go to the pivot, right click anywhere on the pivot. And when I say refresh, can you see the number changed? Okay. I'm just going to undo it. Control Z if you don't know. So we go back to that number. And again, I need to refresh just to make it the same thing. So just be careful. When you're working on a pivot, you may make changes. It's just slightly different from normal Excel. You do need to tell it, refresh yourself. Okay, so hopefully everyone's happy with that. Now, so far, all we've covered is we've pulled 3 items through here, and we've said what's the sum of bill, what's the count of bill, what's the average bill. Now, a lot of people now want to know, I wonder what percentage is January of this total? And so I see a lot of pivot tables where people go like this, equals that, and then they get some funny number here, divided by that. They click enter, and they get their percentage. Okay. You don't need to do that. Pivot tables have come with that functionality built in. So again, same thing. If you've got anything about the data, you right click, you go to value field settings, and in the same place where it says summarize value bar, there's the sum, count, average, etc. Can you see there's a tab here called show values as? When I click on it, it gives you a whole bunch of options. Now, I'm not going to cover all of them because, as you can see, there's quite a few, but I'm going to cover a few of the more important ones. So now, what you'll see here, what we try to achieve there is to say what percentage is January of this grand total. So you'll see there's an option here called percentage of grand total. When I click on it, everything's grayed out. You don't need to do anything more. When I click OK, can you see that that number is now shown as a percentage of the total? So it's 8%, 50%, 40%. That adds up to 100%. Now, the benefit of doing these calculations within the pivot table, as opposed to somewhere over here, is when you add April in, it does the calculations for you. So in this particular case, it will always add up to 100%. There's no risk of it accidentally leaving April out or leaving February out. That's the real power of a pivot table. There's one source of the data, and everything you do to that data, it has to use that data. It has to always be up to date with that data. Just going to right click value field settings. Now, if we want to go back to the original, I go to show value as, and you'll see the option there says no calculations, and I'll say okay. Let's see what else we can do in that area. So I'm going to go to this one, countable. I'm going to right click value field settings. Now, what I want to do now is I want to use this, but if I leave it on count, so if I did that percentage of grand total while it was on a count, it would give me a slightly different number. So when you're on count, it's the equivalent of 58 divided by 933. But if we had it on sum, it would be 184 Rand divided by 2237. So those are two different bits of information. So you can see we're still working on a single column, but we can get sum, count, average, percentage of bill, percentage of the count. So there's one column can give you a ton of information, which is hopefully useful to you in whatever your business is. For this one, I want to go back to sum, and you'll see why now shortly. Go to show value as. Just to explain some of the things, so we've already done percentage of grand total. Percentage of column total, in this case, would be the same thing, but you'll see a little bit later, we can move this to rows, columns, etc. So sometimes you may want percentage of column, sometimes percentage of row. You've also got something called percentage of. I'm going to click on it. And you have the choice now to say, please, Excel, tell me what percentage is this number of the total. But can you see you can choose what the base item is? So I can say, what percentage is it of the previous item, the next item, or January? So I'm going to or January, February, March. I'm just going to choose January so you can understand. It's a bit easier to see it when you calculate it. I say, okay. Because we chose January, what this is saying is January is 100% of January. But February is 600% of January. So if you did that 1138 divided by 184, you'd get that number. And March is 496% of January again. I'm just going to right click value field settings, show value as. I'm now going to rather use previous. So now when I say okay, what I'm saying is, how does it compare to the previous total? So that 100%, we don't have anything earlier, so it's giving us 100%. February is still the same, 617% of January. But can you see that March now is 80%? Because what it's saying is, how does March compare to February? So 915 divided by 1138. So these are all calculations that a lot of people do outside the pivot table because you want to see month-on-month growth and that type of thing. Rather do them in the pivot table. The pivot table can handle them. Most importantly, it is more likely to get it right. It's not relying on hoping that you did the formula correct, hoping you copied it far enough down, etc. Just going to right click again, value field settings, show value as. So that was percentage of. You'll see there's a whole bunch of other ones, and in the navigation page, you'll see we cover them, and there's a YouTube video for every single individual one. But let's go now to this one called difference from. Same logic. I've got January, February, March here. Excel needs to know, what do you want as your base item? When you tell me difference from, what does it mean? So when I have it on previous, what I'm saying is, tell me how different is February from January, and how different is March from February. When I say okay, so January is obviously no different from January, but February is 953 more than January, and March is minus 222. So February has dropped. So this is a very good thing to see month-on-month change in values, whether it's sales or whatever it is. Again, the more important thing is we're doing it in the pivot table. We are not doing it out here and running the risk of maybe getting the formula right or wrong. Just going to right click, value field settings, show value as. The one that I find probably the most useful, I use the most, is this thing called running total in. So now when I'm doing my budget and I see January, February, March, it's great. I like to see what each month was, but I want to see in this case, year to date. January and February together, January, February, March together, it should give me that number. So when I choose running total in, now the reason we've got this, I haven't mentioned before, because Excel sees we've only got months in here, it said, oh, I think you want to do it by month, but you could have multiple items as per Sam's question. We'll cover it a bit later. So sometimes you may need to tell it what must it add up on. But for now, we're saying, give me a running total, base it on the months. When I say okay, so this is now a year to date type number. In January, it's 184. So therefore there's 184. January and February, if I add those two together, comes to 1322. There's 1322. And all three of them added together is 2237, which is the same as that total. So it's quite nice to be able to see both the individual numbers and actually the running total in the numbers. If we just go right click, value field settings, show value as. So you'll see there's a couple of others. So instead of having the actual running total, you can have percentage running total. So there's just a whole bunch of items here you can use. As I've mentioned, I don't want to go through them all. If we've got time, we can maybe come back to them. But a lot of them are just understanding what do they mean by percentage of column. Once you've understood it, just a case of applying it or not. Again, to switch it off, as simple as you go to no calculation in. And remember that it's very important that you think about what this says. Okay, because if we did a running total in while we were on count, numbers would be very different from sum. So you need to just think carefully about that. I'm just going to say cancel. Just before I go on to the next section, are there any questions about this part? I think people who know pivots would have known sum, count, average. I'd be intrigued to know, maybe just by a show of hand, how many people didn't know about the percentage of and running total in and that type of stuff. Maybe just put your hand up if you hadn't known that that existed. Okay, good. I can see it's, yeah. So it's quite a common thing. People understand that part and they look there and they don't realize actually here, there's a whole bunch of other capabilities. So I'm glad to hear that that will be helpful. And keep in mind, the whole focus is to stop you as much as possible working outside the pivot with data in the pivot. So now what I've shown you here, very useful. I'm just going to now clean up, just remove some of these things like that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull in these items here. And the reason I'm going to do this is I just want to show you something else that can be done in Excel. So what you'll see, sorry, I just want to get rid of some of the other costs. Here I've got the bill, some interconnect costs, and the charge to MTN in this case. Now, pretend you'll see I've got an item here called net profit. I'm just going to pull it in briefly. There's the net profit. I'm going to take it out. Let's pretend we don't have the net profit. The data you get doesn't do that, and you want to work that out yourself. So again, you could go like this, equals that plus that plus that. So firstly, you get this strange looking formula, and it gives you the answer. But now you need to remember, do I copy it down? Can you see when you copy it down, it's giving you the wrong answers? So again, working outside the pivot table has its dangers. But there is a way in pivot tables to actually do some of these calculations in the pivot table. So now let me show you how to do this. Now this one, you can't easily right click. You need to click on the pivot table, go to pivot table analyze, and you'll see there's an item here called fields, items, and sets. I'm going to click on that one, and you'll see there's an item called calculated field. So what this is allowing us to do, let's click on it, is it's saying, tell me what we're trying to do. So I'm going to just call it net profit. And I'm just going to put a 2 there because remember, there's already a name called net profit, and it would give me an error message otherwise. And then all you need to do is tell it the formula. So I know that that net profit should be, can you see this list is the same as this list, which is the same as the headings on the raw data. So I'm going to say it's the bill. So I double clicked on it. I put a plus sign, plus that, plus charge to MTN. So I've created the calculation. It is exactly what you would have done if you built the formula here. But when I say OK, can you see it's put this thing in called sum of net profit, and it's done the calculation for you. Now notice there's net profit here and net profit 2. So this is a calculated field. It's done the exact same calculation. But the power of this is when you do it with a pivot table. Again, I've mentioned this is not in the cells, it's hovering above the cells. And actually this number is not achieved by going that plus that plus that. It's actually working in the background in the database, which means I don't actually need these numbers here to have these numbers. So for example, notice I can say, well, okay, now I know what my calculation is doing. Let me get rid of these. And I've now got a report giving me the net profit, but I don't have to leave that other stuff behind. So it's extremely, extremely useful. You can create, I'm just going to undo so we can see it. So you can create data straight out of what's available in the actual pivot table. But at the same time, you can create your own little calculations. And as much as possible, if you do it within the pivot table, it means that next month you get new data, you put it in, you say refresh, and suddenly April appears, the numbers all appear, the net profit appears, everything appears without you having to do too much. So that covers some of the things that can be done in values. Now, there's lots of other things you may think about. Just to show you one or two things, you don't, when it comes to values, I'm just going to remove some of them, not that one. In all these cases, I've pulled a column that had numbers in it. But I can pull, for example, something that's got day of the week in it. if I pull it into values, sorry, wrong one. That one's got numbers, you know, weekday, weekend. Can you see that Excel immediately says, oops, you've given me a column that has the word weekday, weekend. Immediately it converts to count. Okay, because it says, well, I can't sum those words, so I'm going to count them. What you'll find, though, is sometimes you'll pull an item, and again, remember, Excel does a lot of guessing for you, and it may guess a count, even though you want to sum it. I can't do it with this data, but it sometimes happens when there's blanks in your data. So you've pulled something that you know is numbers, but Excel, for some reason, says, no, that's not a number. I'm going to give you a count. Remember, it's as simple as drag it in, click on it, value field settings, and you change it to what you want it to be. In this case, it's not going to work because that's a word, and you can see it doesn't give us the answer. But that's just something to be aware of. At this moment, can I just pause? Any questions around values before we go on to Sam's question around rows? No questions at the moment. Okay, I'm going to continue, and we can then obviously always come back. Now, I did this all in one presentation with the YouTube video. Your clips, you'll see each one has its own little video clip. If you click on the YouTube, it starts here, etc. The next thing I want to do, I'm just going to go back to the navigation page, is we've now covered pretty much some of the items up to here, the rows. Now, you'll see there's a whole bunch of them that I haven't covered. Show value, percentage as, etc. Again, YouTube video clip, click on it, watch it, see if it's useful for you, move on. So let's now go over here where it says report layout, 3.1 report layout. Now, firstly, I'm just going to click on it. To answer Sam's question, you'll see I've already got two items here, but let's just go back to what it looked like originally. So there's the original file, January, February, March, quite nice. So that is okay, and you could have, without the pivot table, you probably could have taken 5 minutes and got this right. But the real power of pivot tables is, as you saw, if I take the destination network, so that's Vodacom, MTN, etc., I click and hold, I drag down to below the month. When I let go, can you see with no effort from you, it said January, cell C was that much. January, MTN was that much. So now, if I'd asked you to do this manually, you'd have to filter on January, filter on cell C, get a number. Filter on January, filter on MTN, get a number. So can you see, you just drag it in, and the pivot table rules cannot be broken. Remember I said you can't right-click and insert a blank? Well, in the same way, this number here, 8.27, can't accidentally add in MTN numbers. And you cannot go here and try, I'm trying to type there a different number. You cannot do it. That is looking at the underlying database and saying how much of the bill also says January, also says cell C. So Sam, hopefully that addresses your question. You can pull in as many things as you want, and keep in mind, the order can be changed. So maybe your focus is less on the months, January, February, March, and more on each item. So maybe I'd rather, I'm going to click on my destination network and drag it up above month and let go. So you see that's a slightly different report. Now it goes cell C for January, February, March, MTN, January, February, March, etc. And to be honest, maybe one of your bosses likes this report and the other one likes that report. So you can see how easy it is to change reports, and actually with a pivot table, just make a copy of the sheet and both reports can exist simultaneously. So it's an extremely, extremely powerful tool. Now I'm just going to maybe change it the other way around. Cell C, January, February, March. Let's put in now weekday, weekend. So I'm going to click hold and I'm going to put it below month when I let go. So now it's starting to look a bit messy, and I'll show you a little bit later how to make it a bit neater. But if you look at the data, MTN in January was 59 Rand. The weekday expenses were 58 Rand. The weekend were 1 Rand 43. So you can see all we're doing is we're just dragging an item in and we either get a useful report or not. We don't have to worry about did I add it up correctly or anything like that. If it doesn't quite make sense, move it around a bit. So let's go. I'm going to put my weekday, weekend above the values. So there's cell C, weekday, weekend. You can see as you add more and more, it can be a bit confusing. But again, just keep working, moving it around. I'm going to move it above destination network. So there's all the weekday costs. There's all the weekend costs. But for now, I'm going to go back to what it was. So rows and columns, you pretty much can drag anything from here into here, and the pivot table will try and create a report for you. And you just got to remember that the report basically is a matrix. It's saying what number always says cell C, always says February, and you want a sum of it. There's 607. Okay, extremely, extremely powerful. Now, just one or two things. So I'm not sure if it was mentioned, but I'm a chartered accountant, and for whatever reason, I just don't like things like this. You can see the way pivot tables work. This is column A, but in that same column, there's the destination network and the months. And I just don't like it. I want it nice grid lines. The default of pivot tables is this. So another useful trick is I prefer something called tabular. So generally, I would take this report, and because I want to see them in their own column, so cell C, MTN must be in column A, January, February, March must be in column B. You click on the pivot table, you go to pivot table analysis and design, and you'll see there's an item here called report layout. And report layout says, how would you like it? This is something called compact form. You can see it's compacted. It's trying to fit it in so you can print it nicely. Personally, I prefer something called tabular form, where you can see it now has it in its own columns. I find it just a little bit easier to read, and also it makes it a lot easier to copy it and paste it somewhere else and actually be able to work on it. Now, just a couple of other things regarding rows. When you in rows, just like with the values, each one of these had its own item. The fields also have their own mechanisms. So a couple of things. Notice I've got a little drop-down box here. So this has got all the data, 2,237 Rand there. I can click on this drop-down, and I've got a whole bunch of options. So I can sort the stuff, A to Z, Z to A. I can do some filters, so give me everything that equals whatever, cell C. Or I can choose it here. So I'm going to just switch these off and say I'm only actually interested in MTN. When I say OK, can you see it only shows me MTN data? But what's nice is nothing else has been lost. It's not like I've deleted cells. I can switch it back on, but here is only MTN. But maybe I only want Vodacom. Or maybe I want the two big networks, Vodacom and MTN. So you can see you can switch it on and off. Now, as I mentioned, these are two different fields. You can see they're shown differently here. So this has its own list, which I can then choose. I can say only for February, please. Okay. Just going to say select all. Select all. So that's quite nice. What you can do as well is if you, similar to, remember over here, I wanted to make that look different. I right-clicked and I said value field settings. Here, I'm going to go to cell C, right-click. When I say field settings, you'll see I get a slightly different setup. So here, because it's values, it spoke about number formats and that. Here, it's because this is now in the rows, slightly different. So again, I can change the name. What I wanted to show you here is when you do this, sometimes these subtotals are they're just too much. You don't want to see them. Excel by default puts them on. So notice that here is where you control it. Not, I'm going to say cancel. You can't go here and say, actually, I'll delete that, please. It won't allow you. So you have to do it through the pivot table. I'm going to right click, field settings. And I'm going to say subtotals, none. When I say OK, can you see maybe that looks a little bit neater? Okay, so it all depends on what you want, how many bits of data, does it look neat? If I right click again, field settings, you'll see there's something called customize. So watch the YouTube video clips, you'll see how you can do a sum and a count and an average. Generally speaking, I'm normally on automatic or none. What is quite important is, can you see I've also got something here called layout and print. There's some useful items in here, but the two I just want to emphasize. Let's say you want cell C to have its data, and then I want that blank row. Remember, you can't insert a blank row via normal Excel. But I can say insert blank line after each item label. And when I say OK, can you see now it's gone and in a controlled way put in that row. Just going to right click, build settings. I'm just going to make it no subtotals, because the last one I want to show you, I'll insert blank lines. Can you see there's an item here called repeat item labels? Now, this is a fairly new thing. I think it came about in about Excel 2010. The way pivots work, it says cell C, then it gives me January, February, March, but can you see these are blank? Because it's assuming you understand that that's a subtotal, and that is this. The problem you have is now I want to copy and paste it into another system, and that system needs it to say cell C, cell C. So there's an item here called repeat item labels. So if you have that set up, when I say OK, can you see instead of now having the blanks, it forces those values in. So this is quite useful, especially if you need to normalize data, because now when I copy and paste this, I don't have to spend half my day filling in these blanks. So it is quite a useful thing. Now, in the YouTube videos, you'll see there's a whole bunch of other features. I just want to quickly, because I see we're almost out of time, just want to show you one more thing. Again, the whole focus here is everything I've shown you. If you liked it, go and watch the YouTube video clip. You can then do it in your own time again and again if you want. I'm just going to go back to the navigation page. I just want to go to this thing called filters. So filters, I pretty much showed you values and rows. Columns are exactly the same things. I can just drag my stuff around. I just find columns are a little bit messier. But the other one that's very useful is this thing called filters. I'm just going to show you. I'm going to take this destination network and put it in the filters. So can you see now it's a much smaller report, but over here we've got destination network. I click, I choose, for example, MTN, and it gives me only MTN data. So hopefully that's quite useful. Again, you can put more than one item in. So let's do weekday, weekend. So now I can almost do a query. So tell me phone calls to MTN on weekends. There's my data. Okay, so you can actually work through that. But the reason I wanted to show you this one is there's a feature in Excel which not really hidden, but not too many people know about it. So you'll see here, pivot table, destination network. Now I've got one pivot table, and this, let's say I'm going to make it cell C. But then I want to make a copy of it and then have it be MTN. So I want to go in one sheet per pivot with the various items on their own sheet. Now you can do it manually. You're welcome to copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, choose the networks, etc. Or click on a pivot table, go to pivot table, analyze. Over here, now you'll be a bit careful. If you click on the options button, you don't see it. If you click on the little drop down, you'll see there's an option here called show report filter pages. When I click on it, it lists the items that we have sitting in this filter. So what it's wanting to know is it's now going to create a whole bunch of new sheets. What must it use? Must it use the weekday, weekend filter or destination networks? I'm going to do destination networks. Now, watch what happens here. You can see it's 5.1, 5.2. When I click OK, first watch what happens here. I'm going to click OK. And can you see I've now got something called cell C, and it's that exact same report, but with cell C switched on. And I go to MTN, same report, but now MTN switched on. So what it's done is it's gone and done what you would have done. Copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, switch to cell C, MTN, etc. So that, as you can see, happens instantly. And what's nice about this is if it was a mistake, you forgot, maybe you shouldn't have had the second summable, I would just come here, delete them all because it doesn't really matter, fix this one, and then do it again. Click on the pivot table, analyze, not the options button, the options drop down, show report of fault pages, destination network, okay, there they are. Cell C is now got cell C, but it's looking a bit nicer. Okay, so I think we're just a few minutes over. I'm not sure if anyone's got any questions. I'm happy to stay on and chat a bit longer. Danny, I don't know if that's if you've got any questions, anyone's made any comments.
Nothing so far to me yet, but a lot of, I've seen people have attended and enjoyed so far. I'm got no questions on my side. I don't know if anyone else wants. I can open up and allow them to chat or to speak if they want to.
If you can, I mean, I've got 10-15 minutes if that's okay with you guys. I'm welcome to answer. You can ask me any questions, especially if you've used pivot tables before. The trick with pivot tables is very simple. If you, the trick is the data. If the data is nice and neat, your pivot tables are going to work wonderfully. They'll be easy pivot tables. The problem people come is where they got messy data and they put them straight into a pivot table. Then you need to start playing with all those calculated fields, etc. So the more you clean the data, the better. So that's my general advice. And pivot tables, don't let them confuse you. When you drag stuff in, it can look confusing. Try and understand what you've seen and just undo it, drag it out, and don't let Excel guess. Okay, don't tick that tick box because Excel says, I feel like putting in rows today. Maybe it's right, but maybe it looks so wrong that so try and purposely do it. So I see Jerry's just said very helpful. So thanks, Jerry. But any other genuine questions? What problems have the people who have used pivot table come across?
I think this has been so comprehensive. You created a whole new set of questions, and I'm surprised there aren't any.
Yeah, but I think what's key.
It's been a fascinating hour, and
I think
really something new.
Yeah, Stan, I think what's key. That's why we put the YouTube video clips in. I mean, in an hour, I'm shooting through it, and I promise you probably can't remember what I did 50 minutes ago, because it's click here, do this. The whole point of the YouTube video clips is now you've seen the things that hopefully you realize that you spent the whole weekend doing work where it could have been done in 5 minutes. Now go and repeat them, watch the YouTube. If you have to watch the YouTube video clip 20 times at midnight, do it. Once you get it, it will be, it is life-changing personally. But you did say up front what my own issues are with Excel. So I'm a bit of a fan.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks to those who've attended. I'm sure you learned a lot. I certainly did. And thank you, Adrian, as usual, fascinating. You never disappoint. And it's been a fascinating, and I hope we can get you back often so that we can learn something, because I know personally I take away something every time I watch you and what you have to say. So it's been great. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Thanks everybody for attending. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon. In Gauteng, it's pretty sunny, nice warm day, so maybe go to the pool.
No.
Take the afternoon off.
No, don't. Go watch YouTube. Go watch the video clips.
No, you could sit with your phone and at the pool with the YouTube.
Yes, you can have your laptop on the side. No problem.
All right. Thanks. And see everyone else who's joining us tomorrow.
Yes. And certificates will be on their way.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
And look forward to hearing from you guys. Ciao. Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
I'm leaving.